Hello, welcome to Everyday Storytelling. How are you doing today? And I have Iron Man. Right, Dad? Hello!
Yes, Iron Man.
Welcome to Everyday Storytelling. How are you doing today? We are going to be reading the Bible and Ben-Hur. And if Kim wants to do synopsis, she can do synopsis. But I have Iron Man. Yeah, Iron Man.
Show us what they do.
They're tiny. Look.
They're not that tiny.
This is all you can do.
What about the thing?
Block. Boom. Oh no, my arm is broken.
All right, whatever. All right, so
guess what? Bye. Yeah.
Thank you, one person, for showing up. I really appreciate you. So, at this point, we are reading Judges. And I thought that I had this in my ribbon. There it is. Wait. It's just kind of whatever. All right, so this is Judges chapter 10. Chapter 10 is pretty short. There's only 18 verses. 11 is pretty long, so we'll just do one chapter. I see I got a notification. That's a notification saying that I'm live. So I hope that more people show up, but I understand because I think that some people are a little bit behind. But this brings me a good opportunity to let everybody know that I did get everything that we've read is now on YouTube. And so if you want to go to YouTube, you can go to YouTube and you can watch my videos at higher speed, and that way it won't take as long. And I'm completely okay with you doing that. So that's totally fine. You can watch these videos at high speed if you like. It might be kind of interesting to watch when the boys are kind of being interesting. To watch them be interesting at high speed. Probably not that interesting to watch me reading at high speed. But here we go. We're at the book of Judges, chapter 10. This is the English Standard Version of the Bible. After Abimelech, there arose to save Israel Tola, the son of Puah, son of Dodo, a man of Issachar, and he lived at Shamir in the hill country of Ephraim. And he judged Israel 23 years, then he died and was buried at Shamir. After him rose Jair the Gileadite, who judged Israel 22 years, and he had 30 sons who rode on 30 donkeys, and they had 30 cities called Havoth Jair to this day, which are in the land of Gilead. And Jair died and was buried in Kamon. The people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals and the Ashtaroth, the gods of Syria, the gods of Sidon, the gods of Moab, the gods of the Ammonites, and the gods of the Philistines. And they forsook the Lord and did not serve him. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hands of the Philistines and into the hand of the Ammonites. Into the hand of the Philistines. I might have said that plural. I'm sorry about that. And they crushed and oppressed the people of Israel that year. For 18 years they oppressed all the peoples of Israel who were beyond the Jordan in the land of the Amorites, which is in Gilead. And the Amorites crossed the Jordan to fight also against Judah and against Benjamin and against the house of Ephraim, so that Israel was severely distressed. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord, saying, We have sinned against you because we have forsaken our God and have served the Baals. And the Lord said to the people of Israel, Did I not save you from the Egyptians and from the Amorites, from the Ammonites, and from the Philistines, the Sidonites also, and the Amalekites, and the Moabites, oppressed you, and you cried out to me, and I saved you out of their hand. Yet you have forsaken me and served other gods. Therefore I will save you no more. Go and cry out to the gods whom you have chosen. Let them save you in your time of distress, in the time of your distress. And the people of Israel said to the Lord, we have sinned. Do to us whatever seems good to you. Only please deliver us this day. So they put away the foreign gods from among them and served the Lord. And he became impatient over the misery of Israel. Then the Ammonites were called to arms, and they encamped in Gilead. And the people of Israel came together, and they encamped at Mizpah. And the people, the leaders of Gilead, said to one another, who is the man who will begin to fight against the Ammonites? He shall be head over the inhabitants of Gilead. That is the end of chapter 10. So we'll have to tune in tomorrow in order to find out what happens in chapter 11. So, Kimmy can't do the synopsis because she already changed into PJs. I think that's what she just told me. So basically, what happened in the last chapter is this dude named Judah was talking to his mom about the guy named Messala, and his mom clarified some things and eventually let the readers know that, because obviously Judah already knew this, but he was of the house of Hur, which is a descendant of Hur, who was he worked under Caleb during the conquest, because Joshua and Caleb were the only ones that were allowed to enter from their generation, and so Hur was like his protege, I guess. And so that is where the Hur family comes from, and you can see Hur in the name of Ben-Hur. So, all right. So now we're on chapter 5 of book 2. I hope everyone is enjoying the story so far. We may only read chapter 5 today, or we're going to try to finish the book. Book 2 there's quite a bit left to go after chapter 5. So that would be over 20 pages, which is quite a bit. All right. So chapter 5. The young Israelite, chapter 5, Rome and Israel, a comparison. That's the name of the chapter. Chapter 5. The young Israelite proceeded then and rehearsed his conversation with Messala, dwelling with particularity upon the latter's speeches in contempt of the Jews, their customs, and much pent round of life. Afraid to speak the while, the mother listened, discerning the matter plainly. Judah had gone to the palace on the marketplace, allured by love of a playmate whom he thought to find exactly as he had been at the parting years before. A man met him, and in place of laughter and references to the sports of the past, the man had been full of the future and talked of glory to be won and of riches and power. Unconscious of the effect, the visitor had come away hurt in pride, yet touched with a natural ambition, but she, the jealous mother, saw it, and not knowing the turn the aspiration might take, became at once Jewish in her fear. What if it lured him away from the patriarchal faith? In her view, that consequence was more dreadful than any or all others. She could discover but one way to avert it, and she set about the task, her native power reinforced by love to such degree that her speech took a masculine strength and at times a poet's fervor. There never has been a people, she began, who did not think themselves at least equal to any other, never a great nation, my son, that did not believe itself the very superior. When the Roman looks down upon Israel and laughs, he merely repeats the folly of the Egyptian, the Assyrian, and the Macedonian, and as the laugh is against God, the result will be the same. Her voice became firmer. There is no law by which to determine the superiority of nations, hence the vanity of the claim and the idleness of disputes about it. A people risen run the race, and die either of themselves or at the hands of another, who, succeeding to their power, take possession of their place, and upon their monuments write new names. Such is history. If I were called upon to symbolize God and man in the simplest form, I would draw a straight line and a circle, and of the line I would say, this is God, for he alone moves forever straight forward, and of the circle, this is man, such is his progress. I do not mean that there is no difference between the careers of nations, no two are alike. The difference, however, is not, as some say, in the extent of the circle they describe or the space of earth they cover, but in the sphere of their movement, the highest being nearest God. To stop here, my son, would be to leave the subject where we began. Let us go on. There are signs by which to measure the heights of the circle each nation runs while in its course, but by them let us compare the Hebrew and the Roman. The simplest of all the signs is the daily life of the people. Of this I will only say Israel has at times forgotten God, while the Roman never knew him. Consequently, comparison is not possible. Your friend, your former friend, charged, if I understand you rightly, that we have had no poets, artists, or warriors, by which he meant, I suppose, to deny that we have had great men. The next most certain of the signs. A just consideration of this charge requires a definition at the commencement. A great man, my boy, is one whose life proves him to have been recognized, if not called, by God. A Persian was used to punish our recreant fathers, and he carried them into captivity. Another Persian was selected to restore their children to the Holy Land. Greater than either of them, however, was the Macedonian, through whom the desolation of Judea and the temple was avenged. The special distinction of the men was that they were chosen by the Lord, each for a divine purpose, and that they were Gentiles does not lessen their glory. Do not lose sight of this definition while I proceed. There is an idea that war is the most noble occupation of men, and that the most exalted greatness is the growth of battlefields, because the world has adopted the idea, be not you deceived, that we must worship something is a law which will continue as long as there is anything we cannot understand. The prayer of the barbarian is a wail of fear addressed to strength, the only divine quality he can clearly conceive, hence his faith is heroes. What is Jove but a Roman hero? The Greeks have their great glory because they were the first to set mind above strength. In Athens, the orator and philosopher were more revered than the warrior. The charioteer and the swiftest runner are still idols of the arena, yet the immortals are reserved for the sweetest singer. The birthplace of one poet was contested by 7 cities, but was the Hellen the first to deny the old barbaric faith? No, my son, that glory is ours. Against brutalism, our fathers erected God. In our worship, the wail of fear gave place to the Hosanna and the Psalm, so the Hebrew and the Greek would have carried all humanity forward and upward. But alas, the government of the world presumes war as an eternal condition. Wherefore, over mind and above God, the Roman has enthroned his Caesar, the absorbent of all attainable power, the prohibition of any other greatness. The sway of the Greek was flowering time for genius, a flowering time for genius. In return for the liberty it then enjoyed, what a company of thinkers the mind led forth! There was a glory for every excellence, and a perfection so absolute that in everything but war, even the Roman has stooped to imitation. A Greek is now the model of the orators in the forum. Listen, and in every Roman song you will hear the rhythm of the Greek. If a Roman opens his mouth speaking wisely of moralities or abstractions or the mysteries of the nature, he is either a plagiarist or the disciple of some school which had a Greek for its founder. In nothing but war, I say again, has Rome a claim to originality. Her games and spectacles are Greek inventions dashed with blood to gratify the ferocity of her rabble. Her religion, if such it may be called, is made up of contributions from the faiths of all others. Her most venerated gods are from Olympus, even her Mars, and for that matter, the Jove she most much magnifies. So it happens, O my son, that of the whole world our Israel alone can dispute the superiority of the Greek, and with him contest the palm of original genius. To the excellences of other peoples, the egotism of a Roman is a blindfold, penetrable as his breastplate. Oh, the ruthless robbers! Under their trampling, the earth trembles like a floor beaten with flails. Along with the rest, we are fallen. Alas, that I should say it to you, my son. They have our highest places, and the holiest, and the end no man can tell, but this I know. They may reduce Judea as an almond broken with hammers, and devour Jerusalem, which is the oil and sweetness thereof. Yet the glory of the men of Israel will remain a light in the heavens overhead, out of reach. For their history is the history of God, who wrote with their hands, spake with their tongues, and was himself in all the good they did, even the least, who dwelt with them, a lawgiver on Sinai, a guide in the wilderness, in war a captain, in government a king, who once and again pushed back the curtains of the pavilion, which in his resting place, intolerably bright, and as a man speaking to men, showed them the right and the way to happiness, and how they should live, and made them promises binding the strength of his almightiness with covenants sworn to everlastingly. O my son, could it be that they with whom Jehovah thus dwelt, an awful familiar, derived nothing from him, that in their lives and deeds the common human qualities could not in some degree have been mixed and colored with the divine, that their genius should not have in it, even after the lapse of ages, some little of heaven? For a time the rustling of a fan was all the sound heard in the chamber. In the sense which limits art to sculpture and painting, it is true, she said next, Israel has had no artists. The admission was made regretfully, for it must be remembered she was a Sadducee, whose faith, unlike that of the Pharisees, permitted a love of the beautiful in every form and without reference to its origin. Still, he who would do justice, she proceeded, will not forget that the cunning of our hands was bound by the prohibition. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image, or any likeness of anything which the Sopharim wickedly extended beyond its purpose and time. Excuse me. Nor should it be forgotten that long before Daedalus appeared in Attica, and with the wooden statues so transformed sculpture as to make possible the schools of Corinth and Aegina, and their ultimate triumphs, the Hocile and Capitolium, long before the age of Daedalus, I say, two Israelites, Bezaleel and Aholiab, the master builders of the first tabernacle, said to have been skilled in all manner of workmanship, wrought the cherubim of the mercy seat above the ark, of gold beaten, not chiseled were they, and they were statues in form, both human and divine, and they shall stretch forth their wings on high, and their faces shall look one to another. Who will say they were not beautiful, or that they were not the first statues? Oh, I see why the Greek outstripped us, said Judah, intensely interested. And the ark, accursed be the Babylonians who destroyed it. Nay, Judah, be of faith. It was not destroyed, only lost, hidden away too safely in some cavern of the mountains. One day, Hillel and Shammai both say so, one day in the Lord's good time it will be found and brought forth, and Israel dance before it, singing as of old. And they who look upon the faces of the cherubim then, though they have seen the face of the ivory Minerva, will be ready to kiss the hand of the Jew from love of his genius, asleep through all the thousands of years. The mother, in her eagerness, had risen into something like the rapidity and vehemence of a speechmaker, but now, to recover herself, or to pick up the thread of her thought, she rested a while. You are so good, my mother, he said in a grateful way, and I will never be done saying so. Shammai could not have talked better, nor Hillel. I am a true son of Israel again. Flatterer, she said, you do not know that I am but repeating what I heard Hillel say in an argument he had one day in my presence with a sophist from Rome. Well, the hearty words were yours. Directly all her earnestness returned. Where was I? Oh, yes. I was claiming for our Hebrew fathers the first statues. The trick of the sculptor Judah is not all there is of art, any more than art is all there is of greatness. I always think of great men marching down the centuries in groups and goodly companies, separable according to nationalities. Here the Indian, there the Egyptian, yonder the Assyrian, above them the music of trumpets and the beauty of banners, and on their right hand and left, as reverent spectators, the generations from the beginning, numberless. As they go, I think of the Greek saying, Lo, the Hellen leads the way. Then the Roman replies, Silence! What was your place is ours now. What was your place is ours now. We have left you behind as dust trodden on. And all the time, from the far front back over the line of march, as well as forward into the farthest future, streams a light of which the wranglers know nothing except what is forever leading them on, the light of revelation. Who are they that carry it? Ah, the old Judean blood, how it leaps at the thought! By the light we know them. Thrice blessed, O our fathers, servants of God, keepers of the covenant, ye are the leaders of men, the living and the dead. The front is thine, and though every Roman were a Caesar, ye shall not lose it. Judah was deeply stirred. Do not stop, I pray you, he cried. You give me to hear the sound of timbrels. I wait for Miriam and the women who went after her dancing and singing. She caught his feeling, and, with ready wit, wove it into her speech. Very well, my son. If you can hear the timbrel of the prophetess, you can do what I was about to ask. You can use your fancy and stand with me, as if by the wayside, while the chosen of Israel pass us at the head of the procession. Now they come, the patriarchs first, next the fathers of the tribes. I almost hear the bells of the camels and the lowing of their herds. Who is he that walks alone between the companies? An old man, yet his eye is not dim, nor his natural force abated. He knew the Lord face to face. warrior, poet, orator, lawgiver, prophet. His greatness is as the sun at morning, its flood of splendor quenching all other lights, even that of the first and noblest of the Caesars. After him, the judges, and then the kings, the son of Jesse, a hero in war and a singer of songs, eternal as that of the sea. And his son, who passing all other kings in riches and wisdom, and while making the desert habitable, and in its waste places planting cities, forgot not Jerusalem, which the Lord had chosen for his seat on earth. Bend lower, my son. These that come next are the first of their kind and the last. Their faces are raised as if they heard a voice in the sky and were listening. Their lives were full of sorrows, their garments smell of tombs and caverns. Hearken to a woman among them. Sing ye to the Lord, for he hath triumphed gloriously. Nay, put your forehead on the dust before them. They were tongues of God, his servants, who looked through heaven, and seeing all the future, wrote what they saw, and left the writing to be proven by time. Kings turned pale as they approached them, and nations trembled at the sound of their voices. The elements waited upon them. In their hands they carried every bounty and every plague. See the Tishbite and his servant Elisha. See the sad son of Hilkiah, and him the seer of visions by the river of Chebar, and of the 3 children of Judah who refused the image of the Babylonians. Lo, that one who in the feast to the 1,000 lords so confounded the astrologers. And yonder, O my son, kiss the dust again. Yonder, the gentleman, the gentle son of Amoz, whom from whom the world has its promise of the Messiah to come. Amos, Amos, yeah, the gentle son of Amoz, from whom the world has its promise of the Messiah to come. In this passage, the fan had been kept in rapid play. It stopped now, and her voice sank lower. Lo, you are tired, she said. No, he replied. I was listening to a new song of Israel. The mother was still intent upon her purpose and passed the pleasant speech. In such light as I could, my Judah, I have set our great men before you, patriarchs, legislators, warriors, singers, prophets. Turn we to the best of Rome. Against Moses place Caesar, and Tarquin against David, Sylla against either of the Maccabees, the best of the consuls against the judges, Augustus against Solomon, and you are done. Comparison ends there. But think then of the prophets, greatest of the great. She laughed scornfully. Pardon me, I was thinking of the soothsayer who warned Caius Julius against the Ides of March, and fancied him looking for the omens of evil which his master despised in the entrails of a chicken. From that picture turn to Elijah, sitting on the hilltop on the way to Samaria, amid the smoking bodies of the captains and their 50s, warning the son of Ahab of the wrath of our God. Finally, O my Judah, if such speech be reverent, how shall we judge Jehovah and Jupiter, unless it be by what their servants have done in their names? And as for what you shall do, she spoke the latter word slowly and with a tremulous utterance. As for what you will do, my boy, serve the Lord God of Israel, not Rome. For a child of Abraham, there is no glory except in the Lord's ways, and in them there is much glory. I may be a soldier then? Judah asked. Why not? Did not Moses call God a man of war? There was then a long silence in the summer chamber. You have my permission, she said finally, if only you serve the Lord instead of Caesar. He was content with the condition, and by fell asleep. She arose then and put the cushion under his head, and throwing a shawl over him and kissing him tenderly, went away. Chapter 6 is called The Accident to Gratus. And this one is another one that's just as long as the one we just read. Who wants to keep going? Kimmy said keep going. Where is JJ? Is JJ with Ed? JJ? I think he is. I think I hear him. Can you hear me? He says he can hear me. All right, let's keep going. Chapter 6, The Accident to Gratus. The good man, like the bad, must die. But remembering the lesson of our faith, we say of him and the event, no matter, he will open his eyes in heaven. Nearest this in life is the waking from the healthful sleep to a quick consciousness of happy sights and sounds. When Judah awoke, the sun was up over the mountains, the pigeons were abroad in flocks, filling the air with the gleams of their white wings, and off southeast he beheld the temple, an apparition of gold in the blue of the sky. These, however, were familiar objects, and they received but a glance. Upon the edge of the divan, close by him, a girl scarcely 15 sat singing to the accompaniment of a nebel, which she rested upon her knee and touched gracefully. I think it must be one of these instruments. Lost my place. To her he turned listening, and this is what she sang, the song. Wake not, but hear me, love, adrift on slumber's sea. Thy spirit call to list to me. Wake not, but hear me, love, a gift from sleep the restful king. All happy, happy dreams I bring. Wake not, but hear me, love, of all the world of dreams 'tis thine. This once to choose the most divine, so choose and sleep, my love, but ne'er again in choice be free, unless thou dream'st of me. She put the instrument down and, resting her hands in her lap, waited for him to speak. And as it had become necessary to tell somewhat of her, we will avail ourselves of the chance and add such particulars of the family into whose privacy we are brought as the reader may wish to know. The favors of Herod had left surviving him many persons of vast estate, where this fortune was joined to undoubted lineal descent from some famous son of one of the tribes, especially Judah. The happy individual was accounted a prince of Jerusalem, a distinction which sufficed to bring him the homage of his less favored countrymen, and the respect, if nothing more, of the Gentiles with whom business and social circumstances brought him into dealing. Of this class none had won in private or public life a higher regard than the father of the lad whom we have been following. With a remembrance of his nationality which never failed him, he had yet been true to the king and served him faithfully at home and abroad. Some offices had taken him to Rome, where his conduct attracted the notice of Augustus, who strove without reserve to engage his friendship. In his house, accordingly, were many presents, which such as had gratified the vanity of kings, purple togas, ivory chairs, golden patera, chiefly valuable on account of the imperial hand which had honorably conferred them. Such a man could not fail to be rich, yet his wealth was not altogether the largest of royal patrons. He had welcomed the law that bound him to some pursuit, and instead of one, he entered into many. Of the herdsmen watching flocks of the plains and the hillsides, far as old Lebanon, numbers reported to him as their employer. In the cities by the sea and in the in those inland he founded houses of traffic. His ships brought him silver from Spain, whose mines were then the richest known, while his caravans came twice a year from the east, laden with silks and spices. In faith he was a Hebrew, observant of the law and every essential rite. His place in the synagogue and temple knew him well. He was thoroughly learned in the scriptures. He delighted in the society of the college masters and carried his reverence for Hillel almost to the point of worship. Yet he was in no sense a separatist. His hospitality took in strangers from every land. The carping Pharisees even accused him of having more than once entertained Samaritans at his table. Had he been a Gentile and lived, the world might have heard of him and as the rival of Herodes Atticus. As it was, he perished at sea some 10 years before his second period of our story. Before this second period of our story, in the prime of life, and lamented everywhere in Judea. JJ? JJ? I think he went downstairs. We are already acquainted with two members of his family, his widow and son. The only other was a daughter, she whom we have seen singing to her brother. Tisra was her name, and as the two looked at each other, their resemblance was plain. Her features had the regularity of his, and were of the same Jewish type. They had also the charm of childish innocency of expression. Home life and its trustful love permitted the negligent attire in which she appeared, a chemise buttoned upon the right shoulder and passing loosely over the breast and back and under the left arm, but half concealed her person above the waist, while it left the arms entirely nude. A girdle caught the folds of the garment, marking the commencement of the skirt. The coiffure was very simple and becoming, a silken cap Tyrian dyed, and over that a striped scarf of the same material, beautifully embroidered, and wound about in thin folds so as to show the shape of the head without enlarging it, the whole finished by a tassel dropping from the crown point of the cap. She had rings, ear and finger, anklets and bracelets, all of gold, and around her neck there was a collar of gold, curiously garnished with a network of delicate chains to which were pendants of pearl. The edges of her eyelids were painted, and the tips of her fingers stained. Her hair fell in two long plaits down her back. A curled lock rested upon each cheek in front of the ear. Altogether, it would have been impossible to deny her grace, refinement, and beauty. Very pretty, my Tirzah, very pretty, he said with animation. The song, she asked. Yes, and the singer, too. It has the conceit of a Greek. Where did you get it? You remember the Greek who sang in the theater last month? They said he used to be a singer at the court of for Herod and his sister Salome. He came out just after an exhibition of wrestlers when the house was full of noise. At his first note, everything became so quiet that I heard every word. I got the song from him, but he sang in Greek, and I in Hebrew. Ah, yes, I am proud of my little sister. Have you another as good? Very many, but let them go now. Amra sent me to tell you she will bring you your breakfast and that you need not come down. She should be here by this time. She thinks you sick, that a dreadful accident happened to you yesterday. What was it? Tell me, and I will keep. I will help Amra doctor you. She knows the cures of the Egyptians. You were always a stupid set, but I have a great many recipes of the Arabs who are even more stupid than the Egyptians, he said, shaking his head. Do you think so? Very well, then, she replied, almost without pause, and putting her hands to her left ear. We will have nothing to do with any of them. I have here that what is much surer and better, the amulet which was given to some of our people. I cannot tell when, it was so far back, by a Persian magician. See, the inscription is almost worn out. She offered him the earring, which he took, looked at, and handed back, laughing. If I were dying, Tirzah, I could not use the charm. It is a relic of idolatry, forbidden every believing son and daughter of Abraham. Take it, but do not wear it any more. Forbidden? Not so, she said. Our father's mother wore it. I do not know how many Sabbaths in her life. It has cured I do not know how many people. More than 3 anyhow. It is approved. Look, here is the mark of the rabbis. I have no faith in amulets. She raised her eyes to his in astonishment. What would Amra say? Amra's father and mother tended Sakia for a garden on the Nile. But Gamaliel, he says they are godless inventions of unbelievers and Shechemites. Tirzah looked at the ring doubtfully. What shall I do with it? Wear it, my little sister. It becomes you. It helps make you beautiful, though I think you that without help. I think you that without help. Satisfied, she remembered the amulet to her. She returned the amulet to her ear just as Amra entered the summer chamber, bearing a platter with washbowl, water, and napkins. Not being a Pharisee, the ablution was short and simple with Judah. The servant went out, leaving Tirzah to dress his hair. When a lock was disposed to her satisfaction, she would unloose the small metallic mirror which, as was the fashion among her fair country women, she wore at her girdle and give it to him, that he might see the triumph and how handsome it made him. Meanwhile, they kept up their conversation. What do you think, Tirzah? I am going away. She dropped her hands with amazement. Going away? When? Where? For what? He laughed. 3 questions, all in one breath? What a body you are! Next instant he became serious. You know, the law requires me to follow some occupation. Our good father set me an example. Even you would despise me if I spent in idleness the rest of his industry and knowledge. I am going to Rome. Oh, I will go with you. You must stay with mother. If both of us leave her, she will die. The brightness faded from her face. Ah, yes, yes. But must you go? Here in Jerusalem you can learn all that is needed to be a merchant, if that is what you are thinking of. But that is not what I am thinking of. The law does not require the son to be what the father was. What else can you be? A soldier, he replied with a certain pride of voice. Tears came into her eyes. You will be killed. If God's will, be it so. But, Tirzah, the soldiers are not all killed. She threw her arms around his neck, as if to hold him back. We are so happy. Stay at home, my brother. Home cannot always be what it is. You yourself will be going away before long. Never. He smiled at her earnestness. A prince of Judah or some other of one of the tribes will come soon and claim my Tirzah and ride away with her to be the light of another house. What will then become of me? She answered with sobs. War is a trade, he continued more soberly. To learn it thoroughly, one must go to school, and there is no school like a Roman camp. Would not fight for Rome? She asked, holding her breath. And you, even you, hate her. The whole world hates her. In that, O Tirzah, find the reason of the answer I give you. Yes, I will fight for her, if, in return, she will teach me how one day to fight against her. When will you go? Amra's steps were then heard returning. Hist, he said, do not let her know of what I am thinking. The faithful slave came in with breakfast and placed the waiter holding it upon a stool before them. Then, with white napkins upward on her arms, she remained to serve them. They dipped their fingers in a bowl of water and were rinsing them when a noise arrested their attention. They listened and distinguished martial music in the street on the north side of the house. Soldiers from the praetorium. I must see them, he cried, springing from the divan and running out. In a moment more he was leaning over the parapet of tiles which guarded the roof at the extreme northeast corner, so absorbed that he did not notice Tirzah by his side resting one hand upon his shoulder. Their position, the roof being the highest one in the locality, commanded the housetops eastward as far as the huge irregular tower of Antonia, which had been already mentioned as a citadel for the garrison and the military headquarters for the governor. The street, not more than 10 feet wide, was spanned here and there by bridges open and covered, which, like the roofs along the way, were beginning to be occupied by men, women, and children, called out by the music. The word is used, though it is hardly fitting. What the people heard when they came forth was rather an uproar of trumpets and a shriller litany, so delightful to the soldiers. The array after a while came into view of the two upon the house of the Hers. First, a vanguard of the light-armed, mostly slingers and bowmen, marching with wide intervals between their ranks and files. Next, a body of heavy-armed infantry bearing large shields and hastolongo, or spears identical with those used in the duels before Ilium. Then the musicians, and then an officer riding alone, but followed closely by a guard of cavalry. After them, again, a column of infantry, also heavy armed, which, moving in close order, crowded the street from wall to wall, and appeared to be without end. The brawny limbs of the men, the cadenced motion from right to left of the shields, the sparkle of scales, buckles, and breastplates and helms, all perfectly burnished, the plumes nodding above the tall crests, the sway of ensigns and iron-shod spears, the bold, confident step, exactly timed and measured, the demeanor, so grave yet so watchful, the machine-like unity of the whole moving mass made an impression upon Judah, but as something felt rather than seen. Two objects fixed his attention, the eagle of the legion first, the gilded effigy perched on the tall shaft with wings outspread until they met above its head. He knew that when brought from its chamber in the tower, it had been received with divine honors. The officer riding alone in the midst of the column was the other attraction. His head was bare, otherwise it was in full armor. He was in full armor. At his left hip he wore a short sword. In his hand, however, he carried a truncheon, which looked like a roll of white paper. He sat upon a purple cloth instead of a saddle, and a bridle with a forestall of gold and reins of yellow silk, broadly fringed at the lower edge, completed the housings of the horse. While the man was yet in the distance, Judah observed that his presence was sufficient to throw the people looking at him into angry excitement. They would lean over the parapets or stand boldly out and shake their fists at him. They followed him with loud cries and spit at him as he passed under the bridges. The women even flung their sandals, sometimes with such good effect as to hit him. When he was nearer, the yells became distinguishable. Robber! Tyrant! Dog of a Roman! Away with Ishmael! Give us back our Hannes! When quite near, Judah could see that, as was but natural, the man did not share the indifference so superbly shown by the soldiers. His face was dark and sullen, and the glances he occasionally cast at his persecutors were full of menace. The very timid shrank from them. Now the lad had heard of the custom borrowed from the habit of the first Caesar by which chief commanders to indicate their rank appeared in public with only a laurel vine upon their heads. By that sign he knew this officer, Valerius Gratus, the new procurator of Judea. Sorry. To say truth now, the Roman, under the unprovoked storm, had the young Jew's sympathy, so that when he reached the corner of the house, the latter leaned yet farther up over the parapet to see him go by, and in the act rested a hand upon a tile which had been a long time cracked and allowed to go unnoticed. The pressure was strong enough to displace the outer piece, which started to fall. A thrill of horror shot through the youth. He reached out to catch the missile. In appearance, the motion was exactly that of one pitching something from him. The effort failed, nay, it served to push the descending fragment further out over the wall. He shouted with all his might. The soldiers of the guard looked up. So did the great man. And that moment the missile struck him, and he fell from his seat as dead. The cohort halted. The guards leapt from their horses and hastened to cover the chief with their shields. On the other hand, the people who witnessed the affair, never doubting that the blow had been purposefully dealt, cheered the lad as he yet stooped in full view over the parapet, transfixed by what he beheld, and by anticipation of the consequences flashed all too plainly upon him. A mischievous spirit flew with incredible speed from roof to roof along the line of march, seizing the people and urging them all alike. They laid hands upon the parapets and tore up the tiling and the sunburned mud of which the housetops were for the most part made, and with blind fury began to fling them upon the legionaries halted below. A battle then ensued. Discipline, of course, prevailed. The struggle, the slaughter, the skill of one side, the desperation of the other, are alike unnecessary to our story. Let us look rather to the wretched author of it all. He arose from the parapet, his face very pale. "Oh, Tirzah! Oh, Tirzah! What will become of us?" She had not seen the occurrence below, but was listening to the shouting and watching the mad activity of the people in view on the houses. Something terrible was going on, she knew, but what it was, or the cause, or that she or any of those dear to her were in danger, she did not know. "What happened? What does it all mean?" she asked in sudden alarm. "I have killed the Roman governor. The tile fell upon him." Here is a picture that is in the book. I'm going to go ahead and show it to you right now. There's a picture of him looking out the window, and there's a tile falling from the roof. All right. The tile fell upon him. An unseen hand appeared to sprinkle her face with the dust of ashes. It grew white so instantly. She put her arm around him and looked wistfully, but without a word, into his eyes. His fears had passed to her, and the sight of them gave him strength. "I did not do it purposefully, Tirzah. It was an accident," he said more calmly. What will they do?" she asked. He looked off over the tumult momentarily deepening in the street and on the roofs, and thought of the sullen countenance of Gratus. If he were not dead, where would his vengeance stop? And if he were dead, to what height of fury would not the violence of the people lash the legionnaires? To evade an answer, he peered over the parapet again, just as the guard were assisting the Roman to remount his horse. He lives, Tirzah. Blessed be the Lord God of our fathers." With that outcry and a brightened countenance, he drew back and replied to her question. "Be not afraid, Tirzah. I will explain how it happened, and they will remember our father and his services and not hurt us. He was leading her to the summer house when the roof jarred under their feet, and a crash of strong timbers being burst away followed followed by a cry of surprise and agony arose apparently from the courtyard below. He stopped and listened. The cry was repeated, then came a rush of many feet, and voices lifted in rage, blent with voices in prayer, and then the screams of women in mortal terror. The soldiers had beaten in the north gate and were in possession of the house. Had beaten in the north gate and were in possession of the house. The terrible sense of being hunted smote him. His first impulse was to fly, but where? Nothing but wings would serve him. Tirzah, her eyes wild with fear, caught his arm. "Oh, Judah, what does it mean?" The servants were being butchered, and his mother? Was not one of the voices he heard hers? With all the will left him, he said, "Stay here and wait for me, Tirzah. I will go down and see what is the matter and come back to you." His voice was not steady as he wished. She clung closer to him. Clearer, shriller, no longer a fancy, his mother's cry arose. He hesitated no longer. "Come then, let us go." The terrace or gallery at the foot of the steps was crowded with soldiers. Other soldiers with drawn swords ran in and out of the chambers. At one place a number of women on their knees, clung to each other or prayed for mercy. Apart from them, one with torn garments and long hair streaming over her face struggled to tear loose from a man, all whose strength was tasked to keep his hold. Her cries were shrillest of all, cutting through the clamor. They had arisen distinguishably to the roof. To her Judah sprang. His steps were long and swift, almost a winged flight. "Mother, mother!" he shouted. She stretched her hands toward him, but when almost touching them, she was seized and forced aside. Then he heard someone say, speaking loudly, "That is he." Judah looked and saw Messala. "What, the assassin, that?" said a tall man in legionary armor of beautiful finish. "Why, he is but a boy." "Gods," replied Messala, not forgetting his drawl, "a new philosophy. What would Seneca say to the proposition that a man must be old before he can hate enough to kill? You have him, and that is his mother, yonder his sister. You have the whole family." For love of them, Judah forgot his quarrel. "Help them, O my Messala, remember our childhood, and help them, I, Judah, pray you." Messala affected not to hear. "I cannot be of further use to you," he said to the officer. "There is richer entertainment in the street. Down Eros, up Mars." With the last words he disappeared. Judah understood him, and in the bitterness of his soul prayed to heaven. "In the hour of thy vengeance, O Lord," he said, "be mine the hand to put it upon him." By great exertion he drew nearer the officer. "O sir, the woman you hear is my mother. Spare her. Spare my sister yonder. God is just. He will give you mercy for mercy." The man appeared to be moved. "To the tower with the women," he shouted, "but do them no harm. I will demand them of you." Then to those holding Judah he said, "Get cords and bind his hands and take him to the street. His punishment is reserved." The mother was carried away. The little Tirzah, in her home attire, stupefied with fear, went passively with her keepers. Judah gave each of them a last look and covered his face with his hands as if to possess himself of the scene fadelessly. He may have shed tears, though no one saw them. There took place in him then what may be justly called the wonder of life. The thoughtful reader of these pages has ere this discerned enough to know that the young Jew in disposition was gentle even to womanliness, a result that seldom fails the habit of loving and being loved. The circumstances, though, through which he had come had made no call upon the harsher elements of the nature, if such he had. At times he had felt the stir and impulses of ambition, but they had been like the formless dreams of a child walking by the sea and gazing at the coming and going of stately ships. But now, if we can imagine an idol, sensible of the worship it was accustomed to, dashed suddenly from its altar and lying amidst the wreck of its little world of love, an idea may have had of what had befallen the young Ben-Hur and of its effect upon his being. Yet there was no sign, nothing to indicate that he had undergone a change, except that when he raised his head and held his arms out to be bound, the bend of the Cupid's bow had vanished from his lips. In that instant he had put off childhood and become a man. A trumpet sounded in the courtyard. With the cessation of the call, the gallery was cleared of the soldiery, many of whom, as they dared not appear in the ranks with visible plunder in their hands, flung what they had upon the floor until it was strewn with articles of richest virtue. When Judah descended, the formation was complete, and the officer waiting to see his last order executed. The mother, daughter, and entire household were led out of the north gate, the ruins of which choked the passageway. The cries of the domestics, some of whom had been born in the house, were most pitiable. When finally the horses and all the dumb tenantry of the place were driven past him, Judah began to comprehend the scope of the procurator's vengeance. The very structure was demoted. Far as the order was possible of execution, nothing living was to be left within its walls. If in Judea there were others desperate enough to think of assassinating a Roman governor, the story of what befell the princely family of Hur would be a warning to them, while the ruin of the habitation would keep the story alive. The officer waited outside while a detail of men temporarily restored the gate. In the street the fighting had almost ceased. Upon the houses, here and there, clouds of dust told where the struggle was yet prolonged. The cohort was, for the most part, standing at rest, in its splendor, like its ranks, in nowise diminished. Borne past the point of care for himself, Judah had heart for nothing in view but the prisoners, among whom he looked in vain for his mother and Tirzah. Suddenly, from the earth where she had been lying, a woman arose and started swiftly back to the gate. Some of the guards reached out to seize her, and a great shout followed their failure. She ran to Judah, and dropping down, clasped his knees, the coarse black hair powdered with dust veiling her eyes. "Oh, Amra, good Amra," he said to her, "God help you, I cannot." She could not speak. He bent down and whispered, "Live, Amra, for Tirzah and my mother. They will come back, and—" The soldier drew her away, whereupon she sprang up and rushed through the gateway and passed into the vacant courtyard. "Let her go," the officer shouted. "We will seal the house, and she will starve." The men resumed their work, and when it was finished there, passed round to the west side. That gate was also secured, after which the palace of the Hurs was lost to use. The cohort at length marched back to the tower, where the procurator stayed to recover from his hurts and dispose of his prisoners. On the 10th day following, he visited the marketplace. Chapter 7, The Galley Slave. And this one is really short, so I'm going to go ahead and read this, and we will finish Book 2. The Galley Slave, Chapter 7. Next day a detachment of legionaries went to the desolated palace, and, closing the gates permanently, plastered the corners with wax, and at the sides nailed a notice in Latin: "This is the property of the emperor." In the haughty Roman idea, the sententious announcement was thought sufficient for the purpose, and it was. The day after that again, about noon, a decurion with his command of 10 horsemen approached Nazareth from the south, that is, from the direction of Jerusalem. The place was then a straggling village perched on a hillside, and so insignificant that its one street was little more than a path well beaten by the coming and going of flocks and herds. The great plain of Esdraelon crept close to it on the south, and from the height on the west a view could be had of the shores of the Mediterranean, the region beyond the Jordan and Hermon. The valley below and the country on every side were given to gardens, vineyards, orchards, and pasturage. Groves of palm trees orientalized the landscape. The houses in irregular assemblage were of the humbler class, square, one-story, flat-roofed, and covered with bright green vines. The drought that had burned the hills of Judea to a crisp, brown and lifeless, stopped at the boundary line of Galilee. A trumpet sounded when the cavalcade drew near the village, had a magical effect upon the inhabitants. The gates and front doors cast forth groups, eager to be the first to catch the meaning of a visitation so unusual. Nazareth, it must be remembered, was not only aside from any great highway, but within the sway of Judas of Gamala. Wherefore it should not be hard to imagine the feelings with which the legionaries were received. But when they were up and traversing the street, the duty that occupied them became apparent, and then fear and hatred were lost in curiosity, under the impulse of which the people, knowing there must be a halt at the well in the northeastern part of the town, quit their gates and doors and closed in after the procession. A prisoner whom the horsemen were guarding was the object of curiosity. He was afoot, bareheaded, half naked, his hands bound behind him, a thong fixed to his wrist and looped over the neck of a horse. The dust went with the party when in movement. I'm at 17% battery. The dust went with the party when in movement, wrapping him in yellow fog, sometimes in dense cloud. It's the top plug on the computer, and be very careful because I don't want stuff to fall over. Sometimes in a dense cloud, he dropped forward, foot-sore and faint. The villagers could see he was young. At the well the decurion halted, and, with most of the men dismounted, the prisoner sank down in the dust of the road, stupefied and asking nothing. Apparently, he was in the last stage of exhaustion. Seeing, when they came near, that he was but a boy, the villagers would have helped him had they dared. In the midst of their perplexity, and while the pitchers were passing among the soldiers, a man was described coming down the road from Sepphoris. At sight of him, a woman cried out, "Look, yonder comes the carpenter. Now we will hear something." The person spoke of was quite venerable in appearance. Thin white locks fell below the edge of his full turban, and a mass of still whiter beard flowed down the front of his coarse gray gown. He came slowly, for in addition to his age, he carried some tools, an axe, a saw, and a drawing knife, all very rude and heavy, and had evidently traveled some distance without rest. He stopped close by to survey the assemblage. "Oh, Rabbi, Good Rabbi Joseph, cried a woman, running to him, here is a prisoner. Come ask the soldiers about him, that we may know who he is, and what he has done, and what they are going to do with him. The rabbi's face remained stolid. He glanced at the prisoner, however, and presently went to the officer. The peace of the Lord be with you, he said with unbending gravity. And that of the gods with you, the decurion replied. Are you from Jerusalem? Yes. Your prisoner is young. In years? Yes. May I ask what he has done? He is an assassin. The people repeated the word in astonishment, but Rabbi Joseph pursued his inquest. Is he a son of Israel? He is a Jew, said the Roman dryly. The wavering pity of the bystanders came back. JJ, are you coming? I'm at 13% now. Kim, can you go get my plug for my computer, please? Quickly? Hi. I lost my place. He is a Jew, said the Roman dryly. The wavering pity of the bystanders came back. I know nothing of your tribes, but can speak of his family, the speaker continued. You may have heard of a prince of Jerusalem named Hur. Ben-Hur, they called him. He lived in Herod's day. I have seen him, Joseph said. Well, this is his son. Here comes the computer cord. Quickly. Like in Return of the Jedi. Quickly. Oh, there we go. I get service. Yay. Good job. Thank you. You may have heard of a prince of Jerusalem named Hur. Ben-Hur, they called him. He lived in Herod's day. I have seen him, Joseph said. Well, this is his son. Exclamations became general, and the decurion hastened to stop them. In the streets of Jerusalem, day before yesterday, he nearly killed the noble Gratus by flinging a tile upon his head from the roof of a palace, his father's, I believe. There was a pause in the conversation, during which the Nazarenes gazed at the young Ben-Hur as at a wild beast. Did he kill him? Asked the rabbi. No. He is under sentence? Yes, the galleys for life. The Lord help him, said Joseph, for once moved out of his stolidity. Thereupon a youth who came up with Joseph, but had stood behind him unobserved, laid down an axe he had been carrying, and, going to the great stone standing by the well, took from it a pitcher of water. The action was so quiet that before the guard could interfere, had they been disposed to do so, he was stooping over the prisoner and offering him a drink. The hand laid kindly upon his shoulder awoke the unfortunate Judah, and, looking up, he saw a face he never forgot, the face of a boy about his own age, shaded by locks of yellowish bright chestnut hair, a face lighted by dark blue eyes, at the time so soft, so appealing, so full of love and holy purpose, that they had all the power of command and will. The spirit of the Jew, hardened though it was by days and nights of suffering, and so embittered by wrong that its dreams of revenge took in all the world, melted under the stranger's look, and became as a child's. He put his lips to the pitcher and drank long and deep. Not a word was said to him, nor did he say a word. When the draught was finished, the hand that had been resting upon the sufferer's shoulders was placed upon his head and stayed there in the dusty locks time enough to say a blessing. The stranger then returned the pitcher to its place on the stone, and taking his axe again, went back to Rabbi Joseph. All eyes went with him, the decurions as well as those of the villagers. This was the end of the scene at the well. When the men had drunk, and the horses, the march was resumed. But the temper of the decurion was not as it had been. He himself raised the prisoner from the dust, and helped him on a horse behind a soldier. The Nazarenes went to their houses, among them Rabbi Joseph and his apprentice. And so, for the first time, Judah and the son of Mary met and parted. The end of Book 2. So I hope that you're enjoying Ben-Hur. We're over 100 pages through this book already, and I don't even remember everything that's going to happen. I know that there's some kind of a chariot scene that's going to happen. That's the only thing that anybody ever remembers from the movie, is there's a chariot scene. But the story is so rich, and it's so detailed, obviously, and it's so good. There for a minute, I thought we were going to be doing the bronze bow over again. Did you feel like that, Kimmy? I felt like we were going to do the bronze bow over again, and Daniel's name changed into Judah. But in this case, he got caught, and now he's off to the galleys. And the galleys, of course, is, who knows what a galley is? Kimmy? Kimmy, do you know what a galley is? JJ, do you know what a galley is? No, a galley is a ship. It's the rowboats that they had that they used to cross the Mediterranean. And a galley slave is one of the rowers on the boat. Oh, Kimmy says at least he gets strong from the job. JJ says he's going to turn into a muscular man like Hulk. So we will have to see what happens in book 3. I didn't mean for that to rhyme, but it did. And I hope you have a good night and enjoy not being a galley slave, which I hope nobody is who is watching this. So God bless you. Have a good night, and we will see you again tomorrow. Bye.